Good morning, everybody. My name is Samantha Hung, and I'm the Chief of the Gender Equality Thematic Group at the Asian Development Bank. We're happy to have the opportunity today to host this session at the 2022 Asia Clean Energy Forum on cooling solutions for a more equitable future. Now, the issue of gender and cooling is generally quite a new idea, but it is one that is critical to discussions related to climate change, energy, and gender equality. From our perspective, there is a need to close the knowledge gender gap on cooling, and we hope that this session contributes to that end. Heat waves are an increasingly common hazard in the Asia and the Pacific, impacting millions of people's health and productivity. And these heat waves are affecting men and women differently and will have a disproportionate impact on women as they become more severe. It is estimated that almost 650 million people in Asia lack access to cooling for basic needs, with impacts on their health, nutrition, and livelihoods. For women who already experience energy poverty, a lack of access to energy for cooling will pose risks to their health and productivity, and it will also place additional burdens on their disproportionate role in care work, such as when schools close due to heat delays, the elderly become ill, and critical resources that they rely on become scarce due to increasing heat. The cooling sector, however, can potentially increase the number of green jobs for women at all levels, from women leading cooling businesses to engineers and technicians. Mobilizing communities to identify heat stress solutions can only be successful with women's full participation in designing and leading on these solutions. And so for cooling initiatives to be effective, women's different needs, constraints dictated by social and gender norms, and perspectives in terms of access to cooling-related services and products, access to finance and employment will also need to be taken into account. So today's session aims to explore some of the gender-related impacts of a lack of access to cooling and the challenges that should be considered, analyzed, and addressed to ensure that cooling interventions and finance acknowledge these important gender differentiated impacts and support equitable access. So I want to take this opportunity to sincerely thank the speakers for joining us today. They represent organizations leading important cooling initiatives at the policy, intergovernmental, research, philanthropy, and community levels. And I want to recognize SE for All in particular, as the first organization that began exploring the intersection between gender and cooling. So I really look forward to the presentations and discussion and the ideas generated here on how we can work together to develop cooling solutions that benefit all. And over to you, Zoni.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Zonabelle Woods, and I'm a senior social gender specialist here at ADB. So it is really my pleasure to welcome you all. Today is the last day of the Asia Clean Energy Forum. And as Sam mentioned, today's session will be looking at issues related to gender equality and cooling, which have not really been fully investigated in the past. So we're bringing together a fantastic group of diverse speakers participating today, and they will help us in outlining some of the key issues and start filling in some of the knowledge gaps that Sam referred to. So we have an hour and a half together this morning, and we have divided the session in three parts. First, we will set the context and hear from two women working on cooling issues who will talk about why cooling is an issue of social equity and gender equality. Women, particularly those that have intersecting vulnerabilities, such as lower income women, older women, women with disabilities, are really among the most vulnerable to heat stress. We will then hear from two Bangladesh specific examples, which will illustrate how cooling is a gender issue. And thirdly, we will hear from a leading philanthropy on cooling and how they have developed their access portfolio to promote cooling as a development priority and support community-based cooling solutions, and how their thinking around cooling access equity has been evolving. This will be followed by two examples of organizations who are promoting community-based cooling solutions. And we hope at the end to have time for Q&A, but please feel free to post your questions in the Q&A box at any time. So we'll begin with Rosa Garcia, who is the Energy Efficient and Cooling Specialist with SE for All, where she supports a number of actions to accelerate global energy efficiency and sustainable cooling. Rosa has previously collaborated with the government of Mexico, the KfW, and the World Bank on energy efficiency projects for residential sector and SMEs. She holds a master's degree in international development and energy from the Paris Institute of Political Studies and a master's of development policies and projects from Pantheon Sorbonne. So over to you, Rosa.
Good morning, everyone. And thank you so much, Sunny, for the kind introduction and for having me here today. I am honored to be part of this conversation. Can we go to the next slide, please? And I would like to start with some of the key findings of the report published last year by SE for All on cooling and gender. This work analyzes how cooling impacts women and studies three main challenges for delivering equitable access to cooling. The first is related to health and well-being. The second challenge is poverty and household dynamics. And the third challenge refers to the conditions at the workplace. I would like to end my presentation with some key figures from the Chilling Prospects report on the population at risk due to the lack of cooling this year. And we are very proud that this year, and for the first time, this report forecasts access to cooling risks by 2030. And it finds that by delivering universal access to electricity and ending extreme poverty by 2030, we could significantly reduce the number of people at risk in the world. Next slide, please. While biological sex is not always a determinant for risk, there are specific conditions where gender contributes to greater vulnerability due to heat stress. And this includes, for example, pregnant women that live in poor settings, where they often live in poor built households where they lack toilets or access to clean cooking and electricity. But also young children and the elderly, both often under the care of women, and are more at risk due to the lack of cooling and as a consequence of the rising temperatures. And women also face additional obstacles to access to healthcare and nutritious diets. And these are two needs that rely on cooling. Currently, up to 90% of the health facilities in 57 Gavi eligible countries lack sufficient cold chains. So access to affordable and efficient refrigerators or sustainable storage can reduce the time that women spend in daily activities at home and can increase the time available for engaging in productive activities outside the households. So cooling is vital for health and well-being from different perspectives, from the health, from the access to health, to vaccines, to medicines, to the access to nutritious food. Next slide, please. And the second challenge is about poverty and household dynamics. And it is true that for millions of people, life doesn't stop during a heat wave. But for those living below the poverty line or those who doesn't have access to reliable, affordable, and sustainable energy, their ability to adapt and thrive is held back without access to cooling. And it is the poor, whether they live in cities or in rural areas, who suffer the most from a lack of cooling. In all regions of the world, female poverty rates are higher than male poverty rates. And by 2030, around 20% of the poorest women in the world will live in Central and Southern Asia. And the impacts of poverty and effects of climate change are not gender neutral, and I think it's important to say it over and over. And this makes it harder for women to access cooling services like home shading and ventilation, or appliances or medical services. And as women are responsible for many household chores, they spend more time at home. For example, girls spend over 40% of their time doing chores at home every day. And this puts them under higher risk. And overall, people living in heat islands in the cities, obviously, are at higher risk of heat stress. And it is important to say that the urbanization rate in Asia sheds light on the urgency for taking action in cities in all the continent. But in a positive note, a number of solutions exist to alleviate this heat burden, such as fans or other solutions that are less expensive and quicker to implement, like paints on the roofs, or wearing lighter clothing and prioritizing indoor housework for avoiding heat peaks, etc. Now, at the workplace, women account for around half of the world's farmers. And agriculture is the most important source of employment for women in South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. Women often participate in post-harvest activities where they are severely affected by the lack of access to refrigeration. Farmers and fishers could benefit from providing immediate cooling to harvested food products, as well as cold chains. This could reduce the food waste, allowing farmers and fishers to sell their products in further places, increase incomes, create jobs, and overall reduce local extreme poverty. Currently, the lack of reliable cold chains generates massive losses of food, particularly in China, in India, in Pakistan, and in Brazil. Now, women frequently lack decent working conditions, including access to restrooms in the workplace. And because of this, evidence has shown that they will adapt their behavior. And for example, they will avoid drinking water throughout the high temperature days to prevent losing work time, or avoid being harassed, making them more prone to dehydration and heat stress. Around the world, about 2 billion women and men work in the informal economy. And in South Asia, more than 90% of women are in informal employments. This figure is incredibly high. And now let's see the formal employment. Under these conditions, it's women and men that face dangerous exposures to heat in certain industries. But there are certain industries that I would like to shed some light on. For example, the garment and the footwear industry, where women make up around 80% of the labor force in the world. And about 75% of this industry is based in Asia Pacific region. Well, increasing shading, improving ventilation, and access to drinking water can drive both productivity and human safety for women and men in vulnerable conditions. And I would like to, in the benefit of time, to go to the, can I go to the next slide, please? To the next one. And the next one. Let me go directly to the figures from the Chilling Prospects report. So now that we have seen the challenges that women face in these three areas, now I'd like to bring your attention to the figures that we have found in the Chilling Prospects. Around the world, there are around 1.2 billion people that are high risk due to the lack of access to cooling. And 60% of this population at risk in the world lives in Asia. India, China, Indonesia, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Philippines have the largest populations at risk in cities in the world. And can we go to the next one? Thank you. And here in this table, you can see a summary of our analysis. And today in Asia, there are 180 million people at high risk living in urban poor areas. 512 more million people live in urban poor settings, and 2 billion more will soon buy an inefficient and cooling device. So cooling it's a matter of, it's an issue of adaptation and also for mitigation. Adaptation for the population at highest risk, and a matter of mitigation for the population at medium risk, or it's the largest population. And if we do not take action, by 2030, there will be around 133 million people at high risk in rural settings and 552 million people living in cities. This number will be around 1.3 billion more people that will purchase inefficient and unreliable refrigerators, air conditioners, and fans. But this story can change if we achieve universal access and eradicate extreme poverty. And we could reduce the overall number of those at risk in Asia, but around 20% in the region. And how cooling needs are met and how fast and with which solutions will be decisive for delivering just, inclusive, clean energy transition and adapting to a warming climate and keeping the SDGs. I would like to finish with a last slide. And on the This is Cool challenge. We are looking for youth-led sustainable cooling solutions that help deliver on one or more cooling needs: food and nutrition, human comfort, or health. And this can be based on energy efficiency, renewable energy, or passive solutions. So we invite you to take a look to this link and to send your innovations and your thoughts and any initiatives. And thank you so much. Over to you, Sonny.
Thank you very much, Rosa, for a really interesting presentation, and also with some very sobering data about the vulnerability that exists here in the Asia-Pacific region. So I would just would like to invite Lily Riahi, who coordinates the Cool Coalition based out of Bangkok, which is a new initiative that was the official outcome of the energy transition track of the UN Climate Action Summit in 2019. And the coalition is doing work to support governments transition to efficient, climate-friendly cooling through a holistic approach to meet the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement, the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol, and the Sustainable Development Goals. Lily also oversees the urban energy portfolio at UNEP, supporting countries and cities optimize the use of distributed energy at the building and neighborhood level to achieve net zero buildings and energy transition targets. Over to you, Lily.
Thank you so much, Andibel, and thank you for bringing us together to discuss what I would consider the long missing part of climate action and sustainable development puzzle. Of course, I'm talking about sustainable cooling. So many of you, I guess, have no doubt in this region faced sweltered through summer heat waves. And if you've had air conditioning, you've probably cranked it up to get through the working day or get a good night's sleep. But cooling is much more than thermal comfort. It's as we've heard also from Rosa earlier, it's about protecting our vulnerable populations. It's about keeping our vaccines viable. It's keeping food fresh from farm to work and workforces productive. As just to give a few facts and figures of the importance of cooling. For these reasons, 1 billion people, as we heard, over 1 billion people face risks from a lack of cooling. Most of them are in Asia and Africa. We have over 1.5 million people dying because they have a lack of access to cold storage and refrigerated transport for vaccines on an annual basis. More than 50% of food is lost post-harvest in developing countries due to a lack of refrigeration and cold chain. And that's in a world where, millions are going hungry, billions. 30% of the world's population is exposed to life-threatening temperatures for at least 20 days a year. And that's only going to be increasing, as we've been seeing in the headlines with all of the heat waves. And it's not just about, the health impacts, and really the difference between 30 and 35 degrees is really life and death, actually. But in addition, there's also economic impacts for just a little bit of increase in heat because of the heat impact on productivity. So I think according to the ILO, almost 80 million jobs could be lost by 2030 due to heat stress. And what's more is that heat waves are really affecting people in cities more than anyone. Cities are heating up at twice the global average rate due to the urban heat island effect. So the heat is felt quite extensively in urban areas. And of course, for the reasons we heard just now, women and girls experience the greatest climate impacts. Climate impacts are not gender neutral, and these impacts of rising heat are showing threats to livelihoods, health, and safety of women. Now, we must increase access to cooling for the reasons I've just outlined, and also because of the impacts that extreme heat does have on women and gender and equity issues, as Rosa has highlighted for us. But the issue is that the more you actually try to increase access to cooling in a business as usual situation, then the more you actually heat up the planet and further compound the gender and equity issues. If we continue to do business as usual, which often is, reaching for the most cheapest AC, which is usually not efficient, we will see cooling emissions, which are 7% today, double and triple over the next decades. We see that, just to give you a figure, like space cooling alone, the amount of space cooling that we will consume would be the equivalent of electricity for China and India today. That greening that amount of power would completely undermine our energy transition in terms of renewable energy. And that also has impacts in terms of gender, because we know that renewable energy is a significant employer for women, especially decentralized renewable energy solutions. And then this, as I mentioned, just greatens the equity divide, because there's people who can afford and cannot afford cooling. And as I will discuss later in the slides, usually even in our cities where there is, shading or trees or various nature-based solutions or natural materials used to reduce heat and make us more comfortable, those are usually in maybe middle income areas of the city. You don't see it as much in informal settlements. So it further it compounds the equity divide. And particularly in Asia, we see that we're going to have the fastest growing use of energy for cooling in buildings if we continue on this trajectory. They say that there's going to be maybe like 10 ACs sold or 30 ACs sold per second, I think, until 2050, if we continue with business as usual. And this will be devastating, as mentioned, for our climate challenge and contribute to heating our planet further. So we really need to make a transition to sustainable cooling. And that is really the raison d'etre of the Cool Coalition, which we launched, as Zonzabel mentioned, in 2019 as the outcome of the Secretary General's Climate Action Summit. And the goal here was really to bring together stakeholders from all across the cooling sector to work towards, making the transition to sustainable cooling and doing it through a comprehensive approach. So that is really looking at how we can reduce the need for cooling in the first place, shift to cooling with lower emissions and also greater use of renewables, improve efficiency, and importantly, protect those who are most vulnerable from a lack of access to cooling, including women. Now, just to take a step back for a moment, all the climate injustices, I think one of the most pertinent is the extreme heat challenge, which we are trying to address in the Cool Coalition. As I mentioned, due to the urban heat island effect, urban poor remain most vulnerable because of the medical conditions they already face, which are exacerbated by heat, a lack of awareness of heat risks, a lack of access to cooling measures, which mitigate the effects of heat. And as I mentioned, those in informal settlements face greater risks because they're least equipped to deal with these risks. And usually urban poor are living in neighborhoods that have the least green and the most concrete for their exacerbating heat. If we had the gender lens, then women are more likely to live in poverty than men, have less access to, the ability to move freely, and face more violence during periods of heat stress. And I know this is an area of research I think ILO is undertaking. In the informal settlements, the women are the ones responsible for chores that must be carried out regardless of the weather. And when you have heat stress in informal settlements, it's the elderly or the most young that are being impacted. And that will probably have an impact on women because they're the ones that are the caretakers. So that's also an important area to investigate. And of course, in a lot of occupations that are carried out primarily by women, they sit in unventilated areas without fans or cooling measures. So extreme heat has a really high impact on their productivity. And also things like cooking and other household chores like firewood collection, for example, which can be further contributing to their heat strain and exhaustion. So I think, and as we've also heard, I think from the SE for All information and research, women also are very vulnerable to heat stress in terms of, for example, when they're pregnant, they face greater risks of miscarriage. And so, there's a real impact here. And I can't say that as the Cool Coalition, we've done enough research, and I hope that today in the discussions we will hear about these as emerging areas of research to really look at how these extreme heat, how this extreme heat is having impact on women and gender. I think in combination with these factors, it's really important to have strengthen the tools for heat awareness and protection to allow women to adapt to extreme heat. And luckily we're trying to work on solutions that can tackle this for women and also in general to tackle the inequity issue that we mentioned. So last year at COP26, we launched a comprehensive guide with various partners of the Cool Coalition, including the Clean Cooling Collaborative. We have Shawi with us here today. And recently we launched a heat action platform as well with the Arston Rock Resilience Center. This is an online tool that helps make it easier for practitioners and stakeholders to see what kind of solutions they have in cities, so that cities can really tackle this extreme heat issue. And we're also working on the ground with national and local governments to devise creative solutions that can spare the most vulnerable from extreme heat by leveraging these resources and know-how. So let me give you a quick overview of some of the solutions that we're working to promote with partners of the Cool Coalition to beat the heat. Now, again, I think these solutions can also create jobs for women. So it's an interesting area to research. Okay, I just see my messages that I have only a minute left. Okay, so let me just see what I can say to you. Basically, what we're working on here in cities is you can really weave city heat resilience into planning, and that has a huge impact on on urban heat. So you can orient streets and building heights so that you can have more prevailing winds. You can distribute green and blue spaces to draw cool air through the city. You can really increase the green and blue spaces. So for example, transforming the concrete jungles of our cities into urban forests can have a big impact. In Seoul, efforts to restore their Chungching stream that runs the middle of the city has actually helped reduce temperatures from 3.3 degrees to 3.3 degrees from 5.9 degrees. So there's a real impact in temperature when you look at increasing green and blue spaces in the city. Here was a water corridor. You can increase reflectivity of hardscapes. So for example, resurfacing our cities to shed heat, not absorb it, using reflective materials. This can also reduce heat. And of course, you can make our buildings more efficient through cool roofs, which can, reject 90% of the heat that lands on them and make a difference in the buildings. And this can also be a very important solution for slums. And of course, we can get rid of all our lousy old air conditioners and replace them with more efficient ones. I guess what I want to say, because of the limited time left, is that these solutions to tackle extreme heat in cities have a significant amount of opportunity for women to also get involved. I think there can be, women are probably maybe more able to have a lot of employment in planning, also in terms of nature-based solutions, which is a very important solution for tackling extreme heat, green and blue spaces. There, you can have a lot of skilling and women's engagement. So there's also opportunities for women to get involved in the solution. And I think that's something that needs a little bit more research. And I hope that we can discuss that a little bit today, about how women can be agents of change for this adaptation effort. I had more to tell you about what we're doing on cold chain as well, but I think I'm out of time now, so I'll keep that for the discussions a little bit later. And look forward to hearing from the rest of the panelists. Thank you very much. Over back to you, Zanzibar.
Thank you, Lily. And I'm really sorry that we did not have enough time, really. I think this session should have been way longer because there's just so many different issues coming up that I would love for us to have, some more time to sort of dig deeper. But hopefully we'll have time at the end where we can have a little bit of a discussion. So thank you very much. So, we're moving from sort of looking at, and you started the discussion on sort of why cooling is a gender issue, but now sort of we're moving to a more sort of concrete view of what's happening in Bangladesh. So to share with us some of the results of our research, we have Dr. Huraira Jabin, who's an academic and a development professional with over 20 years of experience in urban resilience, gender, and the built environment. She has focused on the intersection of gender and climate change in cities. And she works as an associate professor in the Department of Architecture at the Brak University in Bangladesh. So over to you, Huraira.
Hello. Yes, can you hear me now? Okay, thank you, Jolie, for the introduction. So I will try to talk about my experience of working in Bangladesh. And as you heard that I worked in the Department of Architecture for quite a long time. Now I'm working as a research fellow with BIGD. So because of my affiliation and also my training as an architect, when I looked into the heat stress or the climate change, most of my work are around the spatial issue. So what I will try to share with you some of the my experiences and working in mostly the informal settlement. and try to understand how the cooling is an issue for the marginalized groups, and more so it's a gender issue. So if you have followed the IPCC's projection and what they are predicting globally that the changes are happening, so they reported that globally the extreme heat events have resulted in more human mortality and morbidity, and most of the partners in that report agreed with that. But what was interesting to see that the heat waves have intensified in cities, and which is a resultant of two things, is not only the temperature, increase in temperature, but also the air pollution and the limited functioning of the key infrastructure. And in all of it, we always talked about the economically and socially marginalized urban residents. In most of the cases, these are the residents who are living in informal settlement, and they are the ones who are most impacted by these changes. But if I compare this global change with the Bangladesh scenario, we have seen the temperature rising, especially both in the mean temperature and the annual temperature. For example, the record between 1976 to 2019 showed that we already have increase of 0.05 degrees average temperature, and this changes has been very rapid. But on the other hand, if you look at the population distribution in Bangladesh, especially the urban population distribution, where we are saying the heat will have more impact, we have an estimate that 1/3 of our urban populations actually live in the informal settlement. So I want to take you through some of the images of just to share what it means. So if we say living in informal settlement, if you look from above and try to see any of these informal settlements in Dhaka or in Chittagong or in the bigger district, you will see that these are very high density settlement with houses made mostly out of heat absorbing and heat emitting materials. So I am not sure how many of you are aware of these materials. We call it the corrugated iron sheet, which works like an oven, you can say, because if you look at a closer look, sort of zoom into that settlement, you'll see that each of the houses are built along this narrow path or corridor. And if you see the inside of any of those houses, right, like the right-hand side image I'm showing, it looks something like this. That means that these houses are usually one roof deep. That is, you don't have another layer for you to work as a heat buffer. And they are, if you look at the right-hand side image, so they are arranged around an open corridor where individual rooms are occupied by one household. So when I say one household, that means at least 4 to 6 persons in different places. And these linear structures are usually divided into multiple rooms to be accommodating each household. So usually this buildings, you can say, or these houses, the external enclosure are definitely made out of corrugated iron sheets. The internal partitions are often made out of those sheets as well, or sometimes the bamboo mat. But what is interesting in all of these structures are very few, I would say almost none of them have any openings for ventilation or to bring the light in. So the only opening usually these rooms or houses have is the door, which is closed at night. And if somebody is making any window, that will be very high up, or in most of the cases, there will not be any windows. So what it means. So there's a very interesting study done in 2021, which talks about the heat cascade, that if you are thinking about heat stress at the individual level, what is happening to a person is actually a result of a series of interacting systems that generate a very top-down heat cascade. So excess heat load at the landscape or the urban level can be transferred to the building level, where you will have radiation happening from the surfaces and others, and which eventually will impact on the individual level through radiation, through cooling and others. So higher ambient temperature resulting from the global climate change will be further intensified by rapid urban development, which Dhaka is experiencing, or all of the cities in Bangladesh are experiencing. But in most of the cases, because of the affordability, the efficiency of building materials, most of these building materials are low cost and with poor thermal properties. So what we are expecting or experiencing is that collectively these factors have potential to progressively worsen the heat stress a person must physiologically manage, and it's more both indoors and outdoors during the hot weather. So I want to take you to this slide to sort of look at the numbers. So I have been tracking every summer. I have been tracking these numbers, looking into one of the Cholera Research Institute hospital, which is called the ICCDDRB, and they have reported every year during the summer the number of patients they are receiving. So in 2004, when I started looking at it, it was 800 something patients per day. But in last April, just last 2 months ago, they reported that they had 1,379 diarrheal patients one day. That means 57 patients every hour. And in the previous day, on April 5th, they had 1,383 patients, which was their highest ever single day admission. So these numbers may seem like diarrhea is something, it's a health issue. But if you start looking at why diarrhea is happening, they showed a chain of actions that when it's too hot, people tend to drink water. And since the safe water is not available within their household, within the neighborhood they're working, or the outdoor in the city where they're working, it leads to higher diarrheal diseases. And when you have a diarrheal disease, the family, the household have no other option but to take them to the hospital. And we say that these families are just one hospital bill away from going to the poverty trap. So what it means for at the ground. So when we talk about this extreme heat in Bangladesh and the informal settlement, these are the images that we see. In the hospital, these are the mothers who are coming with their children, and these are mostly the very low income households, family members who do not have any other options, and they don't know how to keep their children safe. So for this woman, for this lady being here, not necessarily mean that she is only suffering with her children, but it's also that she's losing that day's work, which will eventually impact on her income or the household income. So on the other hand, if we see the men who are working, especially of this low-income settlement or low-income household, most of their working opportunities, economic opportunities, are out in the open, exposed to extreme heat and sun. And also because they are, by social norm, they are seen as responsible to earn, no matter how the weather extreme condition is. In the weather condition is, they have to work outside and they have to do a manual labor, which also get worsened with the heat stress. So if we look into very closely, I'm going to show you this image just to show that if you look at what is happening within that corridor, most of the women actually cook in there or inside their home, which are already cramped without any opening. The only cooling opportunity they have are through those small fans, which actually start rotating the hot air inside the room. So the only thing they can do is to put some kind of a canopy under that roof to reduce the impact. But these houses becomes the sources of air pollution. But if you look at where they can go to seek refuge in the outdoor, interesting part is because of our social norm, most of the boys or men can go out to the shops which are semi-open, have some kind of opening, but most of the women and girls will be sitting in that narrow corridor, which does not have any airflow. So that's the only open space they are allowed to, or they prefer to go. So in that way, if we look at, as Lily and others were saying, that it's a combination. When we look at the heat stress in the informal settlement, it's a combination of how you look at the gender roles, how you look at the gender differences in income and others. So I'll quickly take you through some of the, I won't go into detail in this one, rather I'll take you through some of the examples of the work I tried to generate evidence at the ground that what happens, what kind of work people do in their home, in their houses. For example, if you look at these two examples, one is a very low house with no openings, and people are cooking inside, which creates even worse built environment condition, living condition inside. But people are also working to reduce those impacts. For example, if you see the right-hand side images, people are trying to make false ceilings to reduce the impact of the heat, trying to create a higher level veranda so that people can go for sit outside for more air circulation. Also, if you see into their workspace, people who were used to work outside, especially in their home-based enterprises, those usually did not have any good weather protection. So if you compare the left-hand side with the right-hand side, you'll see that we are seeing more people working on their own to create some kind of shading for themselves from the protection from the heat and others. And also, in terms of the workplace, most of these low-income households are working outside. So what we used to see before, or what people try to do, is to create some kind of shading for them to protect from the extreme heat and the increased temperature. So what I tried to do through understanding all of it is that I tried to assess what kind of built environment is there for people when they're taking different roles. For example, if you look at this image on the left-hand side lower corner, so when people are taking productive role for this low-income group of people, the only option often are outside, which are extremely exposed to sun and increased heat without any cooling effect. The next one, if you see on the middle of the left-hand side picture, where somebody is taking a productive role, that she is or he is working in a semi-open roof, semi-open shops, and while taking care of the households, but she also works as a community member, community savings group, so that she can have access to credit to improve her housing, then she is comparatively in a better state. And I have seen in the informal settlement that there are situations where women are only working at home with proper housing, with roofs and open spaces, with greeneries to support it, which the topmost situation is showing. And then compare it to the worst condition, for example, where a renter is bound to live in a house for 24 hours a day without any opening. That's one. And there are houses where the roof are so low that you can actually feel the heat right on above you. So if you look at it, so if you just compare these 5 different scenarios, what my works or understanding so far shows that when women are taking 3 roles of reproductive and productive role and have more decision-making ability, then they have better ability to introduce some cooling into their household. But when they're either exposed to sun or just tied inside their home, they're the worst off. So I think I will stop here so that we can have more discussion later on the other issues. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you for a really interesting presentation, Huraira. And, the illustrations in your presentation really sort of drive home the point of how women and the spaces are really limited in terms of access to cooling and sort of decent living conditions. So thank you very much for illustrating that so well. I guess that's your architectural background coming through. So our next speaker is Eric Roeder, who has been working with the ILO. He has been working with the UN, including with the UNCDD, the Convention on Desertification, on addressing dust and sandstorm mitigation, advancing energy efficiency and cleaner production in industry with the co-benefit of reduced greenhouse gas emissions with UNEP. He has also worked on rural infrastructure in the Sekong province of Lao PDR with ILO. And he has also worked with the private sector to advance inclusive and sustainable development, including the development and delivery of projects. So he's currently an ILO technical specialist on green jobs, climate action, and resilience through just transition in the Asia Pacific region. So over to you, Eric.
Thank you so much, Zoni. And I'm very fortunate and happy to join the ACEF. And I think this is a very fascinating and important panel. So today I'll be presenting on, actually it's a working paper, and it's something that's very, very timely. It's Turning Up the Heat, Exploring Potential Links Between Climate Change and Gender-Based Violence and Harassment in the Garment Sector. So the second slide, please. So violence and harassment are widespread issues within the garment sector in Asia, and with the effects of climate change increasing, it is possible that these behaviors could escalate. Gender-based violence and harassment is increasing due to heat stress and extreme weather events, and it's for the garment sector, which is mostly female, as Lily and both Rosa noted, 80% of the garment sector is women. It is important to note that the gender-based violence in the world exists independently of climate change. But however, evidence is finding that violence in the garment sector can be linked to workplace intensity, which is likely to be further stressed by the impacts of climate change. So next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so violence and harassment against garment workers is a documented concern. So violence and harassment here, including gender-based violence and harassment, are incompatible with decent work and a threat to equal opportunities, safe, healthy, productive working environments, according to the ILO Convention number 190. So though violence and harassment are a widespread phenomenon present in all countries, regardless of the sector, occupation of work arrangements, such behaviors are exacerbated by intersecting factors such as persistent inequalities, demographic shifts, and changes in work and organization and technology. So next slide, please. Thank you. Am I missing a slide here? Okay, so I was going to talk about the impact of climate change on the garment sector before jumping to Bangladesh. So maybe I added this slide. So let me just quickly go through that slide. So climate change is increasingly impacting countries around the world, including through increases in temperature and heat stress. The ILO estimates that by 2030, 2.2% of all total working hours will be lost due to heat stress. This will result in productivity loss equivalent to 80 million full-time jobs, or USD $2.4 million. In addition to productivity impacts, heat stress can significantly impact human health, and workplaces with poor ventilation or cooling systems present a higher heat-related occupational safety and health risk. So staying on this slide, we did research in Bangladesh, and as gender-based violence and harassment is already pervasive throughout the country and within the garment sector, Falling levels of productivity due to climate change increase the potential heightened levels of violence and harassment against women garment workers. Now, this could be exacerbated by increases in violence following extreme weather events and other climate change impacts. So in Bangladesh now, the average number of hot days has increased by 26 days annually in recent decades, and this number is projected to continue to rise to an additional 35.8 days per year by 2050. For instance, ILO estimates that by 2030, 4.84% of working hours in Bangladesh will be lost to heat stress. This is the equivalent of around 3,800,000 full-time jobs. So next slide, please. Okay, so the ILO has been taking steps in how to address these issues, and one of them is a transition to more carbon neutral jobs and industries in line with the ILO guidelines for just transition and climate action for jobs initiatives. Given its significant role in contributing high levels of greenhouse gas emissions, water pollution, and energy consumption, the garment industry should focus on greening the sector through policy enforcement and new technologies such as water recycling and energy saving devices. So let's see, next slide, please. Thank you. And so part of the tools that we have and mechanisms that we have available are we have the ILO guidelines for just transition, which provide a policy framework and a practical tool to assist countries in managing the transition to a low carbon economy in a gender transformative manner. They also offer a framework to harness women's leadership and as power agents of change in formulating, implementing, and monitoring, evaluating climate actions. And you can see there that at the micro sector, employment and the social areas, the areas that we focus on. Next slide. So on the Climate Action for Jobs initiative, which was launched in 2019 at the COP25, the CA4J coalition now numbers 48 countries and supports research and development on the impact of climate policies on jobs, strengthening of social dialogue and structures on building social partners' capacity to engage in just transition manners, and enabling formation and implementation of just transition policies based on inclusive and social dialogue. And also we have the Global Accelerator on Jobs and Social Protection for Just Transition. And this is a system-wide, I should say ILO system-wide initiative to help countries create 400 million decent jobs and extend social protection to 4 billion people. And then the next slide. Thank you. And these are the publications that have been touching on this issue. And today's publication that I talked on, Turning Up the Heat, Exploring Potential Links between Climate Change and Gender-Based Violence and Harassment in the Garment District, which was put together by my colleague, Christina Martinez, and my other colleague, Joni Simpson. And also we have the Just Transition Toolkit for a textile and garment sector, and you're welcome to visit these sites. And if you need information, I'm very happy to share. And I think with that, thank you very much for letting me present, and I look forward to any questions. Zoni, back to you.
Thank you very much, Eric, for bringing in sort of that other layer around just transition, which very much links to, creating decent work environment in the context of sort of climate change, and also as we move towards net zero solutions. So, and I think that's a very good way to transition to our sort of last section today, which is really to look at sort of what are some of the existing cooling solutions, some of the community-driven passive cooling solutions that exist out there. And one of the philanthropies or organizations that have been sort of leading this work and supporting sort of community action in this regard is the Clean Cooling Collaborative. And so we're very lucky to have Xiaoji Yin with us today. She's the Senior Associate for Climate Works Foundation and the Head of Access for the Clean Cooking Collaborative. Access to the Clean Cooling Collaborative, too many C's to try to get through for a Spanish speaker. She manages CCC's activities on passive cooling, and she supports the Access portfolio, including awareness raising initiatives and exploratory work on sustainable agriculture and cold chain. So prior to Climate Works, she supported the foundation's annual planning and budget process and researched international development issues related to advanced middle income countries in Asia. She holds a Master's of Development Practice degree from UC Berkeley, College of Natural Resources, and a BA in English Literature from Shantou University in China. So welcome, Xiaoji, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Zoni, and many thanks to the fellow speakers for highlighting this very important issue as I was sitting here listening. Once again, I was reminded that the time to take action is now. So with my time, I wanted to share from the perspective of a climate philanthropic founder, how can we help expand access to equitable cooling solution? First, a little bit about who we are. So Clean Cooling Collaborative, or CCC, I know it's a mouthful. We are an initiative of Climate Works Foundation. And our North Star is to achieve efficient climate-friendly cooling for all by 2050. But some of our audience here might be more familiar with our previous name, which is Kigali Cooling Efficiency Program, or KCEP. So this was the first phase of our cooling work from 2017 to 2021. And last year, we rebranded into Clean Cooling Collaborative to reflect the more holistic approach of our continual work on cooling. So in the next 10 minutes, I wanted to share with everyone our journey in this field. First, take a look back at KCEP, and then looking ahead, how we want to further advance our cooling equity work. To begin, so how did we get started? Well, Kigali Cooling Efficiency Program story, KCEP, as the name suggests, is very much tied to the story of Kigali Amendment. So KCEP was a collaboration of 17 foundations putting together over $50 million to focus on cooling efficiency work, and we worked in tandem with the Kigali Amendment facing down HFCs. So at the very beginning, KCEP was very much a climate mitigation initiative, but at the same time, we clearly understood that cooling is not just a mitigation issue; it is also a sustainable development priority, and also an equity issue. So with that in mind, we developed our access to cooling portfolio. So cooling equity was part of our program strategy and spending. From 2017 to 2021, KCEP invested over $6 million in this portfolio. And back then, cooling access wasn't really well understood or talked about. So in that context, our work was first focusing on promoting cooling as a development priority. And then through demonstration projects on the ground, we tried to make a case why cooling access is so important to people in everyday life, and also from research and knowledge products to keep building evidence and understanding of this issue. And I will share some examples of how we worked in this portfolio. So the first example I wanted to share is our partnership with Sustainable Energy for All. And this was the first step of our access to cooling work. Earlier this session, we heard from Rosa about the data, the evidence, and pathway for cooling for all. I remember 5 years ago, we didn't really understand, there wasn't really like a well-defined narrative of what cooling for all looks like. We didn't know globally how many people were at risk of lack of access to cooling. We didn't really know which geographies to prioritize. So the Chilling Prospect Report series very much for the first time defined and quantified the magnitude of this cooling access challenge. And the findings were featured and socialized at high-level political fora to raise the profile of this issue with political leaders. And the next example is the Million Cool Roofs Challenge. So this was a $2 million global competition designed to scale up the adoption of cool roofs in developing country that's most at risk of cooling access gap. As you can see from the map on the left here, 10 teams were selected to pilot cool roofs in their country, and each team received $125,000 grant funding to do their project. And they were also working to establish the markets and raise awareness with policymakers and local community leaders. The challenge concluded last year, well, a little bit earlier this year actually, and Cool Roof Indonesia team was selected as the winning team, and they will receive a $750,000 prize fund to continue to scale up their work. Later, we will hear from Beta, who's leading this effort in Indonesia, so I'm very excited. And another example, to raise awareness and support frontline cooling champions, we partnered with Ashton to host 3 cooling awards. We also supported Ashton's Fair Cooling Fund, which has helped 7 frontline organizations can co-develop new initiatives to widen access to cooling and gave them grants to turn their plans into reality. And the last example here wasn't actually labeled as quote unquote like an access portfolio project, but as we refreshed our thinking on cooling access, it was very clear that financing plays a very critical role in expanding access to cooling, and not only by growing the overall funding investment in the sector, but also kind of on the consumer-facing side, making clean technologies more affordable to more people. So the project here was an on-wage financing scheme in Ghana, through which employees can purchase eligible air conditioner and refrigerators with a bank loan and have repayments made directly through paycheck. So those are the examples of KSAP for over a 4 or 5 years period of time. And right now we're very excited to see that there are many partners and organizations working to expand access to clean cooling. And we as the Clean Cooling Collaborative will continue to apply strategies to help bridge this cooling access gap. And that include passive cooling solutions, work on efficiency of fans, consumer-facing financing schemes, cold chain access, etc. And also, as Lily mentioned earlier, urban cooling actions to beat the heat. And in addition to all that, we also want to make sure that we are infusing justice and equity principles into our work. So not only in terms of what we are aiming to achieve in terms of outcome and strategies, but also who we work with, trying to diversify our grantee communities, and also how we work, ensuring that there is an inclusive engagement in the implementation of the project. Of course, we have more questions than answers at this stage, but we are very much committed to keep learning by doing, and learning by doing with our communities. So with that, I really want to invite founders, partners, communities, scholars, everybody to join us in this continued journey. Because as we heard today from our speakers, really the stakes are too high and we really just can't afford to do nothing. With that, I'm going to return the floor back to Zoni.
Thank you very much. And we're so fortunate to have with us today one of the winners, or the main winner, I think, of your initiative of cooling initiative contest. And so that is Beta Paramita, who's the assistant professor at the architecture department in the Indonesia University of Education. So she just She has been working on this Cool Roofs Indonesia project since 2019. She also has an architecture background. She finished her bachelor in architecture in 2000, and she holds a Master of Architecture in Urban Design in tropical cities. In 2014, she finished her doctorate at the University of Kitayushu in Japan. And her interest in research includes sustainable city and green building, especially in terms of building performance and outdoor thermal comfort. Currently, she's the chair of the Indonesia Built Environment Research Association and a board member of the International Building Performance Simulation Association, the Indonesia chapter. So she's very active in the Research Resilience Initiative that focuses on community, environmental change, and sustainable development. And she is also in charge of UI Green Metric World University Rankings for Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia. So thank you very much, Bita, for being with us today, and over to you.
Thank you, Zoni, for the introduction, and thank you, ADB, for having me today. This is my honor to present my experience during the work with Cool Roof Challenge. So next slide, please. So I would like to share, this is the condition in Indonesia. We are in the tropical country, hot and humid climate. And also we have average temperature from 2008 until 2009 until 2019. You can see here that mostly our city in Indonesia above 30 degrees Celsius. This is not air temperature, but this is biometeorological. It means that how people perceive the heat along the day. So 11 years we've been through this temperature. So what going to be our experience next, that a low-income population in our country, equivalent with 26.42 million people, will be vulnerable due to the lack of access to cooling system. As we can see here on also Indonesia top 10 as a greenhouse gas emission in the world. And even though we emit the land use change and forestry, but we can see here the electricity and heat mostly our second emit to greenhouse gas emission in Indonesia. So we can see here also that our consumption, 42% in household sector, 33% in industry, and also 25% in commercial. Next slide, please. Next, please. Okay, so what Cool Roof Indonesia has offered for passive cooling? So this is our work. Sorry, previously. Sorry, previous. Okay. So this is our work during the Million Cool Roof Challenge from 2019 until 2021. We can see here 15 cities in Indonesia cover the cool roof. So almost 10,000 occupants can have the benefit from this project. So mostly we offer to the school, because school, we have a very long activity inside the building from 7 o'clock until mostly until 2 p.m. So the roof type also we can see here mostly from corrugated metal, as like in Bangladesh, and then another roof will be concrete wood, and then also the tile clay, and then the asbestos. These all the roof material that we can cover with the cool roof. Next slide, please. So the building typology and occupant characteristic that we've already covered by Cool Roof Indonesia, mostly school, as I already mentioned previously. And this school, we don't have any air conditioning. And then the next building, we try to cover the industrial building, which is mostly with the corrugated metal, a very large building, mostly more than 5,000 square meter. And then we also try to introduce the cool roof project to the low-cost housing. Even in Indonesia, 60% people live in Java Island, but we use clay roof. But another island, outside the Java Island, we use the metal roof. So this is quite interesting that we have different kind of type of roof, and also we have a different result of the reduction temperature based on the roof type. So we also find that in our building typology, most of the women or female live inside the building. Like in the low-cost housing, usually housewife and the children, also elderly, live inside the building, 64%, and also they don't have any significant physical work. They just like cooking, taking care of the children, also taking care of the elderly. So another thing that women inside the house, they live longer compared with men, because they have to prepare breakfast, and then they have to cook some meal for the dinner. So they live around 12 hours inside the building, or somehow they live inside the house 24 hours without outside the building. Next slide. Okay, so this is our experience in Indonesia. Next slide, please. This is our application for school in Tangerang City. As you can see here, we make the measurement not just only for the temperature, we measure their oxygen inside the body. Also, we took their blood sample. This is quite interesting because the girl seems more having the blood thickness compared with the boys. We have some partnership with the doctor. They try to make another experiment. So they try to find why the girls are having the blood thickness compared with the boys. But this is a very challenge opportunity for us. If we can see here, because this girl, the 6th grade of the elementary school, that they become the puberty. So I just guessing that they're going to become have some menstruation. So they have the thickness of the blood. So next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, this is the industrial building when we applied in the Tangerang as well. We can see here that we can reduce the indoor temperature as much as 11 degrees Celsius. So 500 people live in one shift. Usually men and women, they're doing their work under the metal roof. This is for the snack productive building, for the industrial building. So women in Indonesia mostly using the headscarf like me. So you can imagine that inside the building 40 degrees Celsius, and after the coating for the cool roof, they can reduce 11 degrees Celsius, become 29 degrees Celsius. So this is quite a remarkable result for the industrial building. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, this is another sample when we took in Bandung city. Actually, Bandung is not that hot. We are in the hilly city, but somehow we also find some heat transfer from the roof inside to the office. So this is the office. For the first time, they try to use the air conditioning, but then after they know me, they try to, would you please to help us to tackle this kind of issue. And then I try to make some cutting to the roof, and then we can reduce as much as 13 degrees Celsius for the surface temperature. But then inside the building, we still have some issue for the indoor thermal comfort. We just can reduce for 29 to the 27 degrees Celsius. But then I try to find another solution because the heat trap, because the not proper design. We open the door and also we use the open window, and then the heat trap can be released outside. So this is quite remarkable. The result from 29 become 27 because not just because the cool roof, because the heat trap inside the building can be released outside. Next slide, please. Okay. Okay, so this is the production in our our production in our lab. So this is not just introducing our own product, but also we promote the good labor inside the country. So also we promote not just for the responsible for the consumption, also for the production. We also try to give more good certificate of the cool roof in Indonesia. So next slide, please. So this is how we engage to the collaboration, you to you, university to university, university to the government, and also university to the community. So I will try to make it fast. Next slide, please. So this is our plan and target. By the end of 2025, we try to make the cool roof well known in Indonesia. We want to make first time we want to make the national standard in Indonesia for the solar reflective index in Indonesia, because we don't have it previously. Also, we want to cover 36,000 square meter that will contribute energy saving equal to 250 megawatt hour. And then this is also able to reducing microclimate equal to minus 2.2 degrees Celsius. And the end, we're going to find that this cool roof Indonesia will contribute to urban health and well-being. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, that's all mine. Back to you, Sony. Thank you.
Terima kasih, Beta. That was really interesting to hear about sort of both your journey, but also the huge impact that you're having in workplaces and schools and in homes, and sort of it's very exciting to see what your future plans are as well. So we have another example from India. Our colleagues from Sea Balance will present jointly. So as we're running out of time, I won't spend too much time introducing them, but just suffice to say that Hassan and Vinita have been working with Sea Balance on sort of their cool roofs, sort of innovative approaches. And we're very happy to have you with us here today. And I'll just hand it over to you in the interest of time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Zonabel. So as you correctly mentioned, and a lot of our other fellow speakers have highlighted, we have also worked on the informal housing sector, especially the urban poor of India. This was a pilot program that we did in 2 cities in India, specifically in one community in each city, and a total of around 30 houses across these 2 cities. And as you can see, it's a thermal comfort based solution, a thermal comfort based project for the cities in India. So yeah, here is an image of an informal housing settlement. As you can, as also my other fellow speakers have pointed out, we have also researched about the issues that have been faced by these informal housing settlements. And a lot of these issues are similar here. One of which is specific to India is that around 60% of the Indians live in informal housing settlements. Yet their heat stress is largely ignored by cooling efficiency programs which cater to the elite more, although in population and in percentage they are much less, but much more focus is always on the lesser part of the population. But here we have also realized that there are also poorly housed conditions, as we can imagine. There is a really lack, like in these settlements, there is lack of ventilation, lack of good quality materials who can battle sun rays coming in, who can battle heat. And some of the roof temperatures that we have measured go well beyond around 60 degrees as well. And the living temperatures in these houses are much more than 35 degrees through our data that we have gotten. Some of the other issues that we have here is the recurrent power outages, as you can see in the left image, to highlight the inequity in the power consumption. That a lot of power that is being generated is being utilized by the affluent sector, affluent class. And as a result, what happens is these informal housing settlements face either recurrent or planned power shortages through 1 day a week or something like that in India, and a lot of places in India, informal housing places, especially in urban cities. And that's a big issue. They can't even operate fans, basic appliances that can cool down. And this is because of high demand, especially in summers, from ACs, from this affluent class that gets transferred, the effects of which get transferred to these informal housing settlement people. They also, in the image here on the right, as you can see, the women are mostly residents, are residing in these houses all the time. And due to midnight heat stress, it affects the women disproportionately, especially when they wake up early in the morning to prepare food, to draw water, to cook meals for the children, for their spouses, etc. And they are mostly sleep deprived during the night. Families experience health problems, as also again highlighted by my other speakers. And there are children who cannot study, who cannot focus on study. There are people who can't stay in the house. We have had experiences, and people have shared experiences where they can't stay in the house for a certain period of time because it's so hot there. The elderly cannot rest indoors, etc., etc. So all these are very grave issues. So moving on to the solutions. So some of the, so we had, as I mentioned, that we had piloted certain solutions, designed certain solutions for 2 communities across 2 cities, some of which we have highlighted here. One of which is a concept called a radiant barrier and night sky radiation concept. This is, as you can see in these images, this is a solution which is kind of a dynamic solution. A lot of research and work has already been done on the insulation solutions, the static ones, where you can just insulate the house from things. For example, pool roof, etc., which my previous speaker highlighted as well. But we try to go a bit deeper into the issue, and one of the things that we realized through our research and through our design was that if we can just make if we can make the roof insulated during the day and expose it during the night, what will happen is it will enable a two-way temperature exchange rather than just insulating it with the surroundings, which also doesn't let heat pass out when required. So what happens is, as you can see during the day, the insulation, and there are two examples of it. One is one insulation material is EcoBoard and alufoil. These materials are actually insulants. They are closed during the day so that it acts as a radiant barrier, which doesn't let the heat pass through it. And during the night, it is open so that the roof can be exposed to the night sky, and it invariably cools it down so that the inside surroundings are cooled down. So this is the concept that we have experimented with, and this is one of the best. This has given us the best results through our all the experiments that we have done. It's around a difference of around 8 degrees that we have experienced through these solutions, this concept. So the other solution that we have experimented with is thermal mass. So we have planted soil, and we have put soil on the top and planted, again, you can see plants. And what it has done is it has provided thermal mass on the roof, and it's also provided shading, which this is again one of our better, this is a solution which has given one of the better results. And the third being, this is again a very simple solution, cheap, effective one, which anybody can, the idea is that anybody can pick it up and put it on the roof. Recycled plastic PET bottles have been filled with water and put on the roof. This is again, the concept is thermal mass, where the water that is on the roof, it seeps the heat, and it doesn't let the heat of the sun pass. And again, when the water gets heated across throughout the day, during the night time, the water, since the surroundings are cooler, the water emits heat. So it's a thermal mass concept, which is again a very cheap and effective solution that we have experimented with. To continue the presentation further, I would like to invite my fellow team member Vinita to take it forward. So Vinita, the floor is open for you.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Hassan. So the solutions that Hassan just described were co-created with the communities that we worked with. Our overall approach was participatory in nature, where our intention was to work with the communities rather than to work for the communities. So we initiated our community interactions by collaborating with grassroots NGO partners. This was then followed by conducting household surveys with the communities and conducting a series of listening workshops, where our intention was to understand the realities of heat stress and related house structure issues that the communities are facing. This was then followed by a series of participatory workshops where design prompts were shared with the community for their inputs and for their feedbacks, where we wanted to understand what would work, what would not work, and what they liked and what they would not like. The solutions were then installed in selected households, and after, with their consent, and the homeowners who agreed to have these installed were then, after a period of time, invited to critical feedback workshops, where again their feedback was harvested for us to support us with refining the solutions. In addition to this, we also had a series of experience tours where we invited people from the locality to come and give us their feedback so that we would have more information and more inputs to refine these designs. There were a lot of valuable insights that emerged during the process, and I'll share a few of them now. I'll start with the need to contextualize. So this project has been implemented in one informal settlement in 2 Indian cities as of now. And our experience has revealed that there are biophysical, climatic conditions and social factors that impact the people's acceptance to solutions and the usability of these solutions. And therefore, we need to contextualize solutions. Related to this is the need to co-create with the community, because there was a lot of information that was shared by communities that we were not aware about, which was important from a design perspective. I'll then move on to patriarchal influences, where it was observed that men overpowered conversations during the workshops that we conducted. And they also influenced people's decisions, the household's decisions to participate in the co-creation and installation process. So there were instances where women agreed to have certain installations installed in their homes, but we could not proceed with installations because the men from their homes refused to have these installed, sometimes due to aesthetic preferences as well. Patriarchy was therefore very alive in these communities. I'll then move on to a major insight that we had, which is to be patient in an emergency. So we are living in a climate emergency, and as the speakers before me and Hassan also mentioned, that heat stress and other injustices are proliferating across our local communities and across the globe as well. And therefore, we might be tempted to adopt a one-size-fits-all top-down approach to scale things up. However, we realized the need to slow down and work with the communities, where we experienced a lot of unanticipated delays due to back and forths with installations. Certain installations needed to be replaced. There were designs that needed to be refined. There were conflicts that needed to be resolved. And these instances forced us to be patient and deviate from the pace that we had hoped for initially. But this patience has now manifested in a strong relationship and a bond that we've developed with the communities, which is now supporting us with proceeding meaningfully on this endeavor. And this is also something that we hope to emulate as we proceed towards upscaling this effort by working with women's cooperatives and other local partners through capacity building and partnerships in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vinita and Hassan. You know, that last slide, I think it's a really perfect way of ending, because it sort of really gives us some guidance on how we can really think about sort of developing solutions that will work for communities. So thank you very much for sharing your experiences. Unfortunately, we really have run out of time, but thankfully the organizers have given us sort of a little bit of extra time for some last reflections. So if I can just ask each one of the speakers to turn on your camera and also to share with us sort of your key takeaway and reflection from this session today, sort of what has really sort of sparked your interest or an insight that you will be taking away and integrating into your own work, or the key message that you would like people from this session to take away. So I will start with Samantha, who's also still here with us. Sam, or maybe not. So I will start with Rosa then. Please go ahead, Rosa, followed by Lily. So in the same order that people spoke. So over to you, Rosa.
Perfect. Thank you so much, all the speakers. It was super useful and super insightful. And I think that for me, it's call to action. Call to action, first of all, to gather gender disaggregated data and raise awareness and gather this evidence that we can use to push for better policies for more investments, and also to together work in a platform so we can leverage the resources that we already have, to share knowledge, to communicate among us, because I see that we are working in very similar fields. So it could be better if we are all together and we gather our efforts. So yes, and I will be happy to follow this conversation in future occasions, because I see that we have a lot to say.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Sonny.
Thank you so much for that. So over to you, Lily.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think this was a very eye-opening session. I guess for me, my call would be to say, clearly there's a solutions out there that we can deploy to try to tackle the inequities and the gender impacts of rising heat. So I would say, I hope that we can, join together, join forces collectively to bring these and many other benefits that come from cooling solutions to fruition. And I guess, help us keep the planet cool too. So that would be my main call to action. Thanks.
Thank you, Huraira.
Yes, I think I will join with Rosa saying that there are so many, we have the common spaces to work. Many of us are thinking in the same way. So it will be very interesting to see how we compare different contexts, but find out similar solution or similar approaches. But what made me reassured is if we are thinking about cooling and gender and trying to reduce the impact of heat, increase heat, I think going back to the built environment will be something we will be looking into more carefully, and especially for the marginalized group who cannot afford air conditioning, but can think of innovatively. So that's my take from today's one. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you. Over to you, Eric.
Okay, thank you, Zoni. No, I really enjoyed all the presentations. I particularly enjoyed the presentations that share the solutions, and that the solutions don't have to be something expensive, don't have to be something that we have to contact some multilateral bank, a development bank. You just take action on the ground. You're taking action with materials that are discarded. I thought those particular presentations by Benita and Hassan were really, really good. And then from the gender side, I want to say that as climate change accelerates, the gap on gender inequalities will widen if we don't take more substantive actions. And so far, it's been an abject failure in addressing climate change, as we all know. So we must bridge this gap on gender equality, such as pay gaps, disproportionate care obligations, inconsistent implementation of maternity protections, and lack of women's voice and representation in leadership. So that's my quick message, and thank you so much.
Couldn't agree more. Xiaoji, over to you.
Sure, thanks, Sanagon, everyone. One key message from me is that cooling is a climate mitigation priority, it's a sustainable development priority, and equity issue. And one major takeaway for me is that for those of us and many others working on this issue, we must work alongside communities to build solutions with those who are most impacted, not for them.
Thank you. So Beta, that is the perfect, I think, segue to you.
Yeah, thank you, Zoni. So it's very pleasure to have this conversation today. I would like to highlight about having the hands together that from the university, from the community, also the government. So we need to hands together because we cannot work just our side. We need to work together, and then I don't know, perhaps the policy will doing much more faster for this cooling solution. So in Indonesia also we have a lot of heat stress, also another access to the cooling system. Thank you for having this conversation.
Thank you. And Hassan and Renita as well, you presented sort of the last very practical examples, but sort of what would be your key message in going forward?
Yeah, for me, I was thinking about the issue being such a monstrous one that we have to fight on multiple fronts, be it policy levels, be it research, be it practical solutions, on the ground solutions, on every front, be it through activism, whatever means we have to fight, and we have to fight now. And yeah, it was a great experience to have to share the forum with my other very able speakers to also learn about their work. And yeah, happy to be part of it and would like to be retaining a lot of insights.
Thank you, Ata.
Whatever you have shared. Thanks.
Vinita, you get the last word.
And yeah, I'm grateful to be part of this session too. And it's been really insightful to listen to the other speakers here. For me, I think I feel really reassured, recognizing that, there are so many of us in different parts of the world working on different things. And I think in relation to what a few speakers said, the key message for me is collaboration, is that we need to collaborate with each other, collaborate with local communities, collaborate with organizations, collaborate with governments, so that we can really work meaningfully towards addressing this issue that is, as Hassan said, really monstrous in nature. But I feel that with the conviction that we have and the conviction with which we've even shared our presentations today, I feel really motivated right now. And I think, yeah, it's really reassuring to be part of this journey with all of us.
Thank you so much for that. I also, like you, feel very motivated. I think that we have a huge task ahead of us, but clearly there are things that we can do that will make a huge difference in people's lives, particularly those who are most vulnerable and marginalized. So for me, that there are three key takeaways. One, that women need low-cost, efficient, and clean cooling solutions in their homes and in their workplaces. The second one is that, there's a huge need in our region, but as we will be most affected by heat stress. And so, as you said, we need to work collectively to address this. And the last one is really something that all of you have mentioned, is that there is great potential in the solutions that have been presented today and beyond. And so I hope that we can continue this conversation in the future so that we can advance sort of the work and fill in the knowledge gap about sort of what we need to do together for a more sustainable future for everyone. So with that, thank you very much, everyone, and look forward to continuing to work with all of you on this issue. Thank you again.